1944 unfolds beneath a muted French sky, where mud clings to boots and engines idle impatiently. Near Metz the war pauses briefly, yet danger remains everywhere, as Third Army presses eastward under constant uncertainty and relentless pressure. Sergeant John Mims sits behind the wheel of a mud-splattered jeep, hands tight on worn leather. 18 months beside General George Patton have dulled little of the fear, because each day reveals new ways survival balances on impulse. At 3:47 in the afternoon, Patton steps down from the vehicle, jacket unmarked by rank. He moves forward alone without escort, walking casually toward German-held ground, as if artillery and rifles were merely theoretical inconveniences. Mims watches his commander disappear around a bend, heart heavy with practiced dread. This is not the first time, nor even the 10th, yet each instance carries the same unspoken question: whether luck will finally abandon its most reckless beneficiary. A young lieutenant arrives breathless with dispatches, urgency written plainly across his face. When told the general has gone forward alone, disbelief replaces discipline, because doctrine allows many risks, but never the solitary exposure of an army commander. Mims answers calmly despite the weight pressing his chest, explaining that orders were given and must be obeyed. Experience has taught him argument is useless because Patton treats terrain as scripture, demanding personal reading without interpreters or filters. The lieutenant insists action is required, invoking capture or death as inevitable outcomes. Mims listens respectfully yet remains still, because obedience to Patton includes waiting, even when every instinct screams to chase the disappearing figure down the road. Silence stretches across the muddy verge, punctuated only by distant guns. In that quiet, Mims reflects on countless similar moments, each one an exercise in helpless responsibility, where duty demands immobility while catastrophe feels increasingly possible. Patton believes war is decided by ground more than paperwork, by sight more than staff summaries. He distrusts filtered intelligence, convinced that only personal observation reveals truth, a philosophy that repeatedly places his life beyond reasonable protection. Mims has seen the general return muddy and triumphant, bearing sketches that reshape offensives. He has also waited far too long, measuring minutes like years, knowing history could turn on whether one man survives his curiosity. The jeep remains parked, engine cooling as time advances with cruel indifference. Mims grips the wheel harder, rehearsing explanations for Eisenhower that will never suffice, because no justification exists for losing a general to voluntary solitude. Somewhere beyond the bend, Patton walks unseen toward enemy lines, driven by faith in first-hand knowledge. Behind him, the war holds its breath, balanced precariously between brilliance and disaster, while one driver waits, loyal and powerless. Sergeant John Mims reports for duty believing experience has prepared him, yet assignment to General Patton immediately alters that belief, because proximity to legend exposes dangers no manual ever describes for new soldiers everywhere. On his first day driving, Patton orders a destination traced dangerously close to the front. Mims studies the map carefully, hesitates, then speaks up respectfully, only to learn that caution means nothing when Patton seeks confirmation with his own eyes and personal presence overrides all doctrine, training, warnings, limits, expectations. They drive until gunfire becomes unmistakable, rattling nerves despite distance. Artillery thumps echo across broken ground, and Patton calmly exits the jeep, instructing Mims to wait, offering no explanation, no reassurance, and no indication of how long absence might last while silence settles. Fear grows, minutes stretch endlessly forward alone. Mims remains seated, frozen by disbelief, listening to combat sounds grow clearer. He understands instantly that his commander has walked toward danger alone, and with that realization his role shifts forever. From simple driver to silent guardian of an unacceptable secret formed in dust, heat, fear, isolation, responsibility, obedience, loyalty. 45 minutes pass before Patton returns, boots coated in mud, breath steady, expression satisfied. He climbs back into the jeep as if nothing unusual occurred, casually issuing directions, while Mims struggles to reconcile survival with recklessness witnessed firsthand during an act defying doctrine, logic, hierarchy, expectation, probability, training instinct. When questioned gently, Patton explains reconnaissance in blunt terms, dismissing alternatives without hesitation. Maps lie, reports soften truth, and photographs mislead, he insists. Because only standing on contested ground reveals how battles will actually unfold under pressure during real movement. Fear, confusion, exhaustion, noise, chaos, friction, uncertainty, momentum, time, war. Mims drives back toward headquarters in silence, realizing his understanding of command has permanently changed. Courage here is not loud or shared, but solitary and terrifying, exercised without witnesses. Approval, or backup, justified only by anticipated advantage over enemy, terrain, time uncertainty, cost, lives, resources, momentum, initiative, outcome, victory, survival. In following days, Mims replays the event repeatedly, questioning judgment yet bound by duty. He considers reporting the incident, then imagines Patton's reaction. Understanding threats are unnecessary, because loyalty in wartime often operates through fear and admiration combined with hierarchy, reputation, consequence, obedience, silence, discipline, ambition, survival, precedent, loyalty, resolve. Patton resumes command activities as normal, never referencing the walk again. For him it was verification, not adventure, a routine extension of responsibility. Whereas for Mims it becomes a dividing line between ordinary service and continual apprehension about future. Risk, exposure, secrecy, survival, command. Authority, danger, precedent, fate, trust, obedience. That first incident establishes a pattern Mims will come to dread, because repetition strips novelty while preserving danger. Each subsequent walk echoes North Africa, reinforcing Patton's belief in personal observation while deepening the driver's quiet anxiety through memory, anticipation, imagination, silence, waiting, exposure, helplessness, responsibility, loyalty, secrecy, fear, endurance, acceptance. North Africa teaches Mims that genius and madness often share boundaries. Patton's confidence appears absolute, almost mystical, yet it depends on fragile variables including chance, enemy restraint, and timing, none of which can be commanded during war, chaos, motion, confusion, violence, pressure, uncertainty, risk, exposure, vulnerability, survival, leadership, burden, consequence. By the time they return to routine schedules, Mims knows his assignment has irrevocably changed him. Driving Patton now means carrying responsibility without authority, knowledge without permission, and fear without release. Lessons first learned under African sun amid dust, heat, gunfire, waiting, silence, obedience, secrecy, loyalty, endurance, fate, command, war. Weeks pass after North Africa, and the behavior repeats often enough to become routine. Patton drives near front lines, dismounts calmly, and walks forward alone, leaving Mims waiting with engine idling. Ears tuned to distant fire, learning that absence itself becomes a signal of command intent, danger, confidence, and disturbing normality under war. Mims notices how deliberately Patton rejects written intelligence. Reports arrive thick with annotations, aerial photographs spread across tables, yet Patton studies them briefly before folding maps away, insisting that paper cannot convey gradients, soil firmness, concealment, or how fear alters movement, fire, and decisions when boots touch contested ground personally. Each reconnaissance follows a similar rhythm. Patton chooses a location, issues casual instructions, removes insignia, and departs without escort. Mims measures time obsessively, counting minutes by cigarette burns, listening for shots, wondering whether silence means safety or disaster, while imagining headlines never written and explanations no driver should ever have to offer. Patton always returns with details no report contains. He describes folds in terrain, hidden ditches, dead ground unseen from air, and paths vehicles could traverse faster than expected. These observations translate directly into orders later, validating his belief that personal risk yields operational clarity, efficiency, surprise, speed, momentum, and advantage against cautious, predictable enemies. Mims gradually understands the logic despite terror. Patton distrusts filters, believing subordinates unconsciously soften reality. Terrain, he says, never lies, only reveals truths to those willing to approach it closely. This philosophy explains victories but terrifies those forced to guard its secrecy, because one mistake could decapitate an army through arrogance mistaken for courage. The habit intensifies as campaigns progress. What began as occasional verification becomes weekly ritual. sometimes twice within days. Mims memorizes Patton's body language, recognizing when another walk is coming, adjusting posture, preparing mentally for waiting, because objection is futile and obedience becomes the only shield against consequences of refusal or exposure. Officers occasionally ask where Patton has gone. Mims repeats rehearsed answers about inspections, meetings, delays, understanding that half-truths preserve command stability. He recognizes the irony that an army built on information depends upon concealment of its commander's most dangerous habit, a contradiction tolerated because results continue arriving spectacularly, repeatedly, convincingly. Patton's confidence never wavers. He speaks afterward with satisfaction, sketching terrain from memory, issuing directives that surprise planners. Units move faster, encounter weaker resistance, exploit gaps unseen before. Success reinforces method, embedding habit deeper until walking alone into uncertainty becomes normalized, even necessary within Patton's personal calculus of leadership and responsibility. Mims records private thoughts only in his diary, pages filled with admiration laced with dread. He acknowledges Patton's brilliance while fearing fate's patience. War rewards boldness until it does not, and the driver understands statistics eventually catch even legends. Regardless of reputation, medals, or victories accumulated against probability, logic, caution, and institutional safeguards. The habit spreads indirectly. Staff sense Patton's uncanny awareness of ground, attributing it to intuition. None imagine the literal footsteps behind insight. Mims alone witnesses the physical cost, the mud, scratches, torn fabric, labored breathing. Moments when the general returns quieter than usual, carrying knowledge purchased dangerously close to capture or death. As months advance, Mims stops asking whether the habit will end. Instead, he wonders when it will exact payment. Each departure becomes heavier, not because risk increases, but because repetition erodes novelty, leaving raw fear unbuffered by surprise. Waiting becomes endurance, loyalty becomes burden, and silence becomes the price of serving an extraordinary reckless commander. By the time new theaters loom, the pattern is unbreakable. Terrain has replaced reports in Patton's hierarchy of truth, and habit has hardened into doctrine of one. Mims accepts his role unwillingly, knowing history celebrates outcomes, not drivers who waited helplessly, while generals disappeared forward, trusting ground more than maps, men, caution, or fate. At headquarters, the absence goes unnoticed, because Patton's authority shields irregularities and his reputation discourages questions. Maps move, phones ring, orders flow, while staff assume inspections explain delays, never imagining their commander alone beyond wire. Boots in mud, relying on instinct rather than layers of intelligence meant to protect him. General Hobart Gay occasionally asks where Patton spent the afternoon, receiving vague answers delivered casually and confidently. No alarms trigger, because confidence substitutes for accountability, and because victories keep arriving, reinforcing faith that whatever the general does privately must somehow serve operational momentum and allied success without provoking scrutiny or dissent. Staff officers picture Patton touring units with escorts, exchanging brief encouragement, then returning for briefings. This assumption persists because it fits doctrine, and because challenging it would imply risk intolerable to contemplate. A possibility no one voices aloud while the war demands certainty, control, and predictable command presence everywhere daily. The machinery of headquarters rewards compliance, not curiosity, especially under pressure. Patton's decisiveness creates momentum that overwhelms doubt, and subordinates learn that unanswered questions fade beneath urgent tasks because results silence concern, and speed leaves little space for reflection about methods never formally discussed within official channels and accepted culture. Only the driver knows the truth, and he is invisible within hierarchy. Mims waits beyond maps, guarding a secret heavier than any weapon because revealing it would shatter trust, invite discipline, and expose vulnerability at the very apex of an army built on certainty, authority, and controlled risk doctrine alone. Patton's staff trusts outcomes more than process, an unspoken bargain forged by success. Every breakthrough validates autonomy, and every captured objective quiets unease, allowing extraordinary behavior to hide inside ordinary reporting cycles where timelines compress, explanations simplify, and dangerous deviations vanish behind triumph and exhaustion without written acknowledgement ever recorded. Secrecy becomes systemic, though unintended, because no mechanism exists to detect absence cloaked as initiative. Patton's charisma fills gaps. His confidence substitutes for verification. And headquarters operates smoothly, unaware that command continuity rests partly on luck, timing, and a single driver's obedience during critical operations across fluid fronts, repeatedly, unseen. The war's tempo discourages introspection. Messages stack, decisions accelerate, and leaders prioritize movement over method. In such conditions, Patton's disappearances register as efficiency rather than danger, reinforcing a culture where boldness eclipses procedure, and where questioning success feels almost disloyal amid shared urgency and collective exhaustion, pressure, deadlines looming everywhere. Even Eisenhower remains unaware, insulated by layers of staff and distance. Reports emphasize progress, not risk, and Patton's results justify latitude. The system assumes rational delegation, never considering that its most aggressive commander personally gathers intelligence like a lone scout outside doctrine, protection, and formal accountability structures, oversight, safeguards entirely. This ignorance protects morale but magnifies peril. If truth surfaced, command would fracture under fear, restrictions would follow, and Patton's methods would end. Silence, therefore, persists, not from conspiracy, but from collective preference for results over revelation, victory over vulnerability, and momentum over uncomfortable truths during wartime command, culture, norms. Mims senses this fragility intuitively, understanding silence serves larger machinery. He bears witness quietly, because speaking would force impossible choices upon superiors. His loyalty is paradoxical, protecting a general by endangering him, sustaining operational success while gambling against chance, bullets, patrols, and the randomness of war itself, daily, relentlessly, unseen. Thus headquarters functions efficiently, blind to the edge it balances upon. Orders succeed, maps advance, and history records triumphs, never footnotes of solitary walks. The silence endures because wars remember outcomes, not the hidden risks tolerated to achieve them, until fate eventually demands its accounting from commanders, witnesses, survivors, alike. August heat hangs over the hedgerows of France, when Patton leaves the jeep and disappears toward German lines, trusting instinct over caution, while Sergeant Mims waits sweating, counting minutes, listening to distant guns, sensing that this walk feels longer, heavier, and far more dangerous than the others before the war changes forever. Minutes stretch into hours beside the silent jeep, as insects buzz and artillery mutters far away, and Mims fights panic, replaying orders to wait, imagining maps without their general, imagining headlines without mercy, fearing that August afternoon may end with absence instead of return and consequences no staff can repair. At nearly 3 hours, dread overtakes discipline, because Patton never stays this long, and Mims debates breaking orders. Knowing obedience preserves command yet risks catastrophe, while the forest ahead seems to breathe secrets, shadows, and the possibility of capture or sudden death within moments that will define loyalty forever afterward. When Patton finally emerges from the tree line, limping and torn, relief crashes into fear, because blood stains his sleeve, not theatrical but real, a thin line of red proving how close bravado came to disaster, and how narrow survival truly was during an August afternoon etched into memory forevermore alone. Mims jumps forward instinctively, seeing torn fabric and crimson marks, asking about wounds, already fearing answers, while Patton dismisses concern with irritation, insisting movement matters more than comfort, more than fear, more than the visible cost paid quietly along that rural road where chance nearly rewrote command history entirely today. Only after driving does Patton explain the truth, describing a German position watched from a ditch, barbed wire tearing cloth and skin, a sentry glimpsed too close, and a sprint fueled by calculation rather than panic. All weighed against lives potentially saved tomorrow by knowing terrain better than reports allowed. Mims understands the logic unwillingly, because Patton's reckless courage produces clarity no briefing provides, revealing weaknesses invisible on maps and transforming personal danger into operational advantage. Yet this knowledge offers little comfort when imagining how easily fate could have turned minutes differently, leaving the army leaderless in hostile fields alone. Blood dries as Patton resumes command without pause, issuing orders that adjust assaults precisely, reducing forces needed, accelerating breakthroughs, and justifying risk retroactively, while staff marvels at intuition, never suspecting it was purchased through solitary exposure to rifles, patrols, and unforgiving chance during an unrecorded walk beyond protection lines again. The incident leaves Mims shaken deeply because loyalty now carries blood imagery. And every future stop near the front resurrects August's memories, making each wait heavier, each delay longer, each rustle of leaves a possible omen of loss he alone must anticipate without authority to intervene or warn others openly. For Patton, the sleeve becomes irrelevant, another scratch absorbed by momentum, reinforcing belief that fortune favors audacity, and that generals earn understanding by seeing ground personally, even if that means flirting with capture, death, and scandal unseen by headquarters or history's official record during relentless campaigning across liberated France alone. August in France marks a threshold, because after blood appears, risk feels tangible rather than abstract, sharpening both Mims' dread and Patton's resolve, binding them in a silent pact of obedience and survival, where questions remain unasked and consequences accepted without negotiation as war presses onward, without pause toward victory. That blood-stained sleeve never enters reports, yet it symbolizes the thin line separating genius from disaster, reminding those who witnessed it that victory often advances on unacknowledged risks, borne quietly by individuals standing alone at history's edge, waiting, watching, hoping for a return while engines idle and fate hesitates nearby. The order to wait settles on Sergeant Mims like lead, because obedience means stillness while danger advances, and loyalty demands silence as Patton vanishes ahead. Sitting alone by the jeep, he becomes the final barrier between discipline and instinct, sworn to protect a general by doing absolutely nothing at all. Every minute stretches painfully, measured by distant gunfire and the ticking engine, while Mims imagines outcomes no training prepared him for. He understands that breaking orders could unravel command authority, yet following them might leave history asking why one soldier watched his commander walk into peril, without protest whatsoever thereafter. Waiting becomes an act of courage inverted, requiring restraint instead of movement, patience instead of fire. Mims grips the steering wheel, rehearsing explanations for superiors who will never know the truth, because the general's command was absolute and the cost of disobedience felt heavier than the sound of approaching danger. Other soldiers pass occasionally, unaware of the burden parked beside the road, seeing only a driver on standby. Mims answers questions vaguely, guarding Patton's absence like a classified secret, knowing that a single careless sentence could summon escorts, alarms, and consequences that would shatter the fragile autonomy Patton insists upon. The weight of loyalty sharpens memory as Mims recalls Patton's threat about rifle companies and front lines. Fear of transfer is trivial compared to fear of loss, yet both reinforce obedience, binding driver to general through an unspoken contract where trust replaces procedure and responsibility is carried, alone without witnesses or approval. Time distorts beside the road, compressing fear and stretching hope, until imagination fills the silence with footsteps and gunshots. Mims watches the bend ahead relentlessly, understanding that if Patton does not reappear, he alone must decide when waiting becomes negligence, and when loyalty transforms into culpability under unforgiving scrutiny afterward. The impossible weight lies in knowing the general chose this danger freely, making protection paradoxical. Mims cannot intervene without betrayal, cannot assist without exposure, and cannot explain without punishment, so he waits, embodying discipline in its purest form, where restraint preserves command even as anxiety corrodes the nerves minute by minute. Orders to wait transform a simple driver into a custodian of risk, guarding absence rather than presence. Mims senses that Patton trusts him implicitly, a trust heavier than armor, because failure would not be tactical but personal, etched into memory as the moment obedience succeeded or failed catastrophically forever thereafter. The roadside becomes a moral checkpoint, where duty is tested without witnesses or orders repeated. Mims realizes that many soldiers charge forward under fire, but few are asked to remain motionless while imagining the loss of command itself, carrying responsibility without authority, courage without action, and fear without release anywhere. When Patton's philosophy demands independence, subordinates absorb the risk silently. Mims understands that the general values initiative even in himself, and expects loyalty to extend beyond comfort. Waiting therefore becomes service, a hidden contribution to victory, ensuring Patton returns with insight rather than chaos trailing behind his absence today alone. Loyalty under impossible weight reshapes fear into vigilance as Mims listens for engines, voices, footsteps. Each sound could signal relief or disaster, and every second reinforces the oath he never spoke aloud, to protect his commander's intent, even if that means guarding an empty road and trusting fate to show mercy. Eventually patience is rewarded, but the waiting leaves scars unseen, teaching Mims that war tests more than bravery. It tests restraint, obedience, and the capacity to carry unbearable responsibility quietly, because sometimes the most dangerous duty is not advancing under fire, but standing still while history walks away alone briefly. The forest tightens around Patton and Mims as the German patrol approaches, boots crunching softly through leaves, voices low and casual. Every second narrows the margin between observation and discovery, because distance means survival now. Patton crouches calmly, pistol ready, while Mims feels breath become thunder inside his chest. 6 German soldiers move methodically, unaware that history kneels nearby in mud and shadow. Their rifles hang loosely, confidence born from routine patrol rather than expectation of contact. Mims studies their spacing instinctively, counting steps, judging angles, realizing that one careless glance would end a war career and perhaps alter the war itself forever. Patton's composure is unsettling because he watches like a hunter rather than prey. His eyes follow terrain features, escape routes, depressions in the ground, while danger inches closer. Mims understands then that this recklessness is calculated, a personal reconnaissance conducted with the same discipline Patton demands from entire divisions. The patrol pauses briefly, one soldier lighting a cigarette, the flame flaring like a signal flare in the darkening woods. Mims freezes completely, convinced exposure is inevitable. Smoke drifts harmlessly away, and Patton does not move, trusting wind direction and German complacency more than luck or prayer. Seconds stretch impossibly, measured by heartbeat and rustling fabric. A soldier steps closer, boots nearly level with Patton's hiding place. Mims tightens his grip on the rifle, knowing firing would doom them both, yet instinct screams for action. Patton remains still, embodying restraint sharpened into lethal patience. The Germans resume walking, conversation resuming about rations and cold, oblivious to the invisible line they crossed safely. Relief does not come immediately because silence remains dangerous. Patton waits, counting steps backward this time, ensuring distance restores advantage before movement, because survival depends on discipline even after danger seems past. Mims finally exhales slowly, muscles trembling from restraint rather than exertion. He realizes this moment will never appear in reports or commendations, yet it defines the war's fragility. One patrol, one glance, could have removed a commanding general from history without ceremony or explanation under chaotic circumstances. Patton whispers instructions calmly, directing withdrawal through terrain features Mims barely noticed. Even now, Patton observes ground carefully, noting German routes and weaknesses. This near capture becomes data, converted instantly into tactical understanding, proving that risk fuels insight in Patton's relentless philosophy of command and personal verification always. As they retreat, Mims understands the thin line separating courage from catastrophe. Patton's confidence inspires awe, yet terrifies those tasked with following orders. The general risks not only himself but the structure of command, trusting fate, skill, and enemy predictability to preserve both his life and operational momentum. The incident imprints itself permanently on Mims's memory, because fear here was intimate and silent. There were no explosions, no shouted commands, only breath control and discipline. He realizes that this kind of danger is invisible to armies, yet decisive, shaping outcomes through information gathered inches from disaster. Returning toward the jeep feels unreal, like waking from a held breath. Mims glances backward repeatedly, half expecting pursuit. Patton walks steadily, unshaken, already processing conclusions. The German patrol fades into irrelevance, reduced from mortal threat to footnote, because survival reframes fear into something almost instructional. Seconds from capture redefine loyalty for Mims because he shared vulnerability without authority. He followed, waited, and endured terror silently, protecting Patton's autonomy through obedience. In that forest, war condensed into a single choice, where remaining unseen preserved not only 2 lives, but the momentum of an entire army. Every solitary walk Patton took beyond the lines returned with invisible trophies, because terrain remembered things maps forgot. Ditches revealed fire lanes, hedgerows concealed machine guns, and soil softness predicted vehicle bogging. These observations quietly altered plans, shifting battalions, artillery arcs, and attack timings before orders ever reached subordinate commanders. Information gathered under boots and breath proved sharper than aerial photographs. Because perspective changed meaning, Patton saw slopes as obstacles or opportunities, not contours. He adjusted axes of advance, reduced overcommitment, and redirected armor accordingly. Decisions that saved hours, fuel, and lives without explanation beyond confident, brief instructions issued routinely. Staff briefings later reflected certainty Patton never justified, because he never explained its source. Orders arrived polished and final, leaving planners unaware that a general's muddy shoes informed them. This secrecy preserved authority, avoided debate, and ensured speed, while quietly embedding frontline truth inside headquarters paperwork and operational timelines universally. Battles shifted before contact occurred, because Patton adjusted force ratios early. A ridge scouted personally meant fewer infantry losses later, and a hidden draw altered artillery placement decisively. Units advanced where resistance thinned naturally, creating breakthroughs that appeared bold, yet were calculated quietly through minutes of lonely observation under fire. Subordinates sensed outcomes improving without understanding why, which built faith bordering on superstition. Patton's confidence seemed prophetic, yet it rested on sensory detail and proximity to danger. He removed uncertainty personally, then distributed certainty impersonally, allowing entire formations to move faster than enemies who still argued with incomplete assumptions elsewhere. Risk translated directly into tempo, because first-hand knowledge removed hesitation. While others requested confirmation, Patton already decided. His reconnaissance shortened decision loops, enabling exploitation before defenses reset. German units often faced attacks earlier than expected, misjudging American intentions, because one man had walked their ground hours before combat commenced suddenly. Not every walk produced dramatic insight, yet cumulative effect mattered enormously. Minor adjustments aggregated into operational advantage, smoothing advances and reducing friction. Logistics followed paths Patton tested personally, avoiding bottlenecks. These efficiencies rarely earned headlines but compounded daily, quietly accelerating collapse across sectors. Third Army traversed relentlessly during late campaigns. Information bought with risk carried moral weight, because Patton gambled himself to spare others. Each confirmed observation replaced speculative orders that might waste lives. Though reckless by regulation, his method aligned with his values, prioritizing decisive action over personal safety and accepting danger as command responsibility rather than privilege alone. German resistance often collapsed unevenly, confusing analysts, yet reconnaissance explained disparities. Positions Patton inspected fell quickly, while untouched sectors fought stubbornly. This pattern reinforced his belief that leadership proximity shaped outcomes. Seeing ground created intuitive anticipation, allowing strikes where morale already frayed under pressure unseen by maps and enemy routines. After action reports later justified successes with doctrine and coordination, omitting the origin. Official language sanitized improvisation into procedure. Patton allowed this fiction because results mattered more than credit. His walks remained unrecorded inputs, influencing campaigns invisibly, while institutions preserved tidy narratives suitable for manuals and post-war analysis and formal histories. Mims observed consequences indirectly, watching maps change after each absence. Routes shifted, objectives refined, timetables compressed. He learned silence carried weight, because speaking would unravel method. Protecting Patton's secrecy meant protecting effectiveness. Even when fear lingered from each disappearance beyond the comforting hum of the Jeep engine, idling, patiently, nearby. Thus battles bent quietly under footsteps unseen by history, yet decisive in motion. Risk purchased clarity, clarity purchased speed, and speed purchased victory. Patton's solitary reconnaissance rarely fired shots, yet it shaped fires everywhere else, proving that sometimes wars turn on what one man chooses to see for himself, alone. Sergeant Mims carried fear like a second uniform because responsibility without authority corrodes silently. He could not order Patton back, could not warn headquarters, and could not intervene without disobedience. Each disappearance forced him to wait, listening to distant fire, imagining telegrams, courts, and widows, all while remaining motionless beside an idling jeep. Waiting became an act of endurance rather than obedience, because time stretched unpredictably. Minutes felt like accusations, hours like verdicts. Mims imagined German patrols, accidental shots, unseen sentries, and missteps ending careers and lives. Yet orders were orders, and loyalty demanded stillness even when instinct screamed movement. Without witnesses observing quietly nearby, fear had no outlet, because Mims could not share it with anyone. Confession meant punishment, silence meant isolation. He sat gripping the wheel, rehearsing explanations for generals he might face, wondering how blame would travel downward fastest, and whether obedience would matter if the general never returned from the road ahead alone. Authority rested entirely elsewhere, yet consequences threatened him personally. If Patton vanished, Mims would be the last witness, the final checkpoint before disaster. He imagined inquiries dissecting minutes and meters, questioning why a driver waited instead of acted, and whether loyalty could excuse inaction under mortal circumstances defined by war and command failures. Each rustle of leaves sharpened dread, because imagination filled gaps reality withheld. Mims studied hedgerows, roads, and tree lines, guessing where danger hid. He counted footsteps in memory, estimating how far Patton could walk, calculating when bravery crossed into madness beyond recoverable limits. During solitary waiting, breathing, listening, sweating, frozen with doubt always. No doctrine prepared him for this burden, because manuals assumed hierarchy functioned cleanly. Drivers drove, generals commanded. Patton erased boundaries casually. Mims bore knowledge without permission to act, carrying secrets heavier than equipment, understanding that silence protected effectiveness while slowly eroding his own nerves during repeated waits. Days, nights, campaigns unacknowledged entirely. Watching other soldiers move freely intensified frustration because they possessed clarity of role. Infantry advanced, staff planned, messengers delivered, Mims alone guarded absence. His task was negative space, ensuring nothing happened, while praying for something to end, an ordeal invisible within official operations, records, reports, briefings, and commendations entirely absent still. Fear deepened whenever officers approached, because questions hinted at exposure. "Where is the general?" they asked casually. Mims answered with practiced vagueness, feeling deceit coil inside him. Protecting Patton required half-truths, and half-truths multiplied stress faster than outright lies ever could, under wartime pressure. Scrutiny, hierarchy, fear, alone waiting. Occasionally relief arrived when Patton reappeared, muddy yet calm. Mims felt anger and gratitude simultaneously, emotions without permission. The general's survival postponed catastrophe but guaranteed repetition. Each return reset the cycle, ensuring the driver would endure again, because nothing changed except dates on maps and locations, seasons, fronts, risks, silently repeating endlessly. Loyalty demanded obedience even when obedience terrified him, because military trust flows downward unevenly. Mims trusted Patton with his life, yet Patton unknowingly gambled Mims' future. That imbalance defined the burden, a quiet sacrifice made by those nearest greatness but furthest from power during war. Waiting, silence, dread, duty, patience alone. He never considered refusal, because refusal violated identity. Driving Patton meant accepting danger indirectly, absorbing risk without recognition. Mims understood heroism did not always advance forward. Sometimes it stayed parked, engine running, guarding absence, praying history would never ask what he saw, alone, waiting, fearful, accountable, forever, silently, nearby, present. In the end, the driver's burden left no medals, only endurance. Fear passed privately, authority remained distant. Mims survived by waiting again and again, trusting that Patton's footsteps would return. Until they did, his courage was restraint, invisible, essential, and unrecorded within wartime chaos. Memory, silence, fear, duty, loyalty, service, alone. Patton's obsession with first-hand knowledge defined his command, because understanding terrain and enemy positions personally outweighed reports or maps. He trusted no one to observe for him, and the solitude he chose was both a strategic advantage and a personal cost, isolating him from staff while sharpening decisions that would determine life and death in combat. Each solitary walk into forward positions reinforced authority through example, because soldiers and officers alike witnessed courage manifested in deliberate, dangerous action. Patton's presence ahead of lines inspired troops and unnerved enemies, creating a reputation that carried weight far beyond his immediate command, becoming a psychological weapon in addition to a tactical maneuver. The burden of command fell unevenly, because those like Sergeant Mims shared risk without the glory or recognition. Drivers and aides observed, waited and feared, while Patton alone stepped into uncertainty with unflinching resolve. Solitude became a tool, teaching his subordinates the weight of obedience, vigilance, and the constant proximity of mortal danger inherent in war. Patton's decisions were informed by observation, yet the cost was perpetual vigilance. Hours spent alone surveying front lines, paths, and enemy positions honed strategic intuition, but left him exposed to surprise attacks, sniper fire, and miscalculation. Each calculated risk demanded trust in intuition, endurance of fatigue, and personal bravery unmatched by any subordinate or aide. The personal reconnaissance pattern reinforced discipline, because soldiers saw their general embrace danger while enforcing order. His presence at the front elevated morale, yet created logistical tension, forcing aides and commanders to balance obedience with fear. Understanding that strategic insight often required Patton to place himself far beyond conventional safety protocols, alone with the enemy in mind. Commanders around him adapted because they learned the limits of delegation. Patton's insistence on first-hand assessment undermined reliance on intelligence alone, emphasizing that judgment cannot always be outsourced. Every map, report, and briefing was tested against physical observation, teaching staff that thorough preparation sometimes demands solitary engagement with reality, unfiltered by intermediaries or assumptions. The legacy of obsession extended to historical memory because historians recognize that Patton's willingness to walk into danger shaped campaigns decisively. Each advance, each reconnaissance, each solitary survey reinforced a pattern of leadership that combined audacity with precision, producing victories and mistakes alike, leaving an enduring example of the intertwining of risk, insight, and personal responsibility. Risk and solitude became intertwined because Patton accepted isolation as a necessary companion. The battlefield was both classroom and crucible, teaching that command is measured not by orders given from safety, but by decisions made with incomplete information, personal exposure, an awareness of consequences for oneself and those dependent on timely action. The human cost was indirect because aides endured anxiety, fatigue, and moral tension while observing a general's deliberate peril. MIMs and others carried responsibility vicariously, navigating uncertainty while preserving the operational chain. Patton's freedom to act alone imposed a quiet burden on those around him, showing that leadership carries psychological weight even when no shots are fired. Lessons in courage and command emerged because observing risk without succumbing to panic models decisive action. Soldiers internalized the principle that command is inseparable from responsibility, and that the lives of men depend upon leaders willing to endure exposure, uncertainty, and solitude to secure strategic outcomes that would ripple across entire theaters of war. Ultimately, Patton's obsession forged results, because victories in Europe were informed by insight gained personally at the front. Solitude, danger, and relentless observation became hallmarks of his command style, leaving a legacy where the effectiveness of leadership was inseparable from personal courage, enduring focus, and willingness to bear risk alone for the sake of soldiers and mission.